Welcome, everyone, to the Aunties of Reservation Dogs. Thank you for joining us for this discussion with the creative talent of women from the hit television series Reservation Dogs. My name is Cindy Benitez, Program Manager at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. I'm joined here with the creative talent of women, including one director, writer, and producer of Reservation Dogs, Tazbah Chavez. Tazbah, can you briefly introduce yourself and tell us where you're from?
Manahu, my name is Tazbah Chavez. I am a citizen of the Bishop Paiute tribe, and I come from the Nüümü, Diné, and San Carlos Apache people. And I'm happy to be here with y'all today.
Thank you. For the first question, as a writer and director of numerous television series like Accused and Resident Alien, what has the creative process been like for you in a show like Reservation Dogs, where it is an entirely Indigenous-led show?
I think one of the main differences, of course, is that when you have a room full of Indigenous creatives, there's a shorthand that is already built in. So you don't have to do as much educating as you do in a space where maybe you're the only Native person involved. So you kind of get to skip over Indian 101. I also think that the nuance that is able to exist in what comes out on screen is feels effortless, and I feel feels very authentic, because oftentimes when you are a part of a show that has Native characters but isn't Indigenous led, you sort of have to do a lot of work as the sole person in the room, and that doesn't always see through the end of like production or what comes out on the other side. And so the intentions are always good, and I'm super proud of the work that I've done on Resident Alien and really excited for what's coming out on Accused. It just takes a little bit more educating. And I think also when when you have like a script written by a Native writer, I think it helps to have a Native director to take that through the visual component of that. And there's little tiny things that they'll make sure are in there, whether that's like how the car should be or what should be in a car, or what the couch should look like. There's all this kind of stuff that, you can do a lot as a writer, and I've been able to work for showrunners who were very receptive and very much like, you tell us how this goes. And so I'm very grateful for that. And then sometimes you're like, but I'm only one of us, so hopefully I get this right, for the broader audience. But I think, working with all Native creatives, I think feels safe. I think it feels really, what's the word? I feel like it's just really juicy. Like there's so much to pull from between everybody's stories and their communities, and I don't know. I'm grateful to be a part of all these stories.
No, that's wonderful to have that safe space where you can get your creative juices going, right?
Yeah.
That you don't have to look around and be like the only Native person or the person of color in the room, right? On the show.
You don't have to explain as many things. And then also I think that your jokes are funnier because people actually understand them in the room.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
When it actually comes to your writing, how are you putting your own take on character development and stories in your show like Reservation Dogs?
Yeah, I think that with a series like Reservation Dogs, each of us in that room are sort of putting our own spins on the characters that we get to write for. And I think there's characters in the show that some of us relate to more than others. And so particularly for Reservation Dogs, I feel like I've been able to bring my backstory and the people that I know and my experiences into a lot of the female characters, which has been very fun. And, really thinking about the kinds of Native women that I know and that I grew up with. And I think that that's sort of my contribution, to the character development. Of course, we're all writing for all of the characters. And so I think there's a little bit of all of us in every one of those characters that exist, whether that's from our backstory, our personalities, or family members that we know.
So it basically would be like a very diverse, like writer's room from each different perspective. Basically, it's like whatever character comes out, you guys just vet it out and that's what happens. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we kind of start to think about who a character is, what their function is to the story, and what kinds of people we know in our own lives. And, you know, to be kind of specific, I know that you were able to talk with the women from WideNet, but, you know, Rita's story in that particular episode, I really drew upon one of my cousins as sort of an example of Rita. And it's, you know, she's somebody that I'm close with and I know. And, you know, we have that storyline that her and Teeny have in some way, which is like, you know, we have lives that like each other's lives look so much better than they are. And so, you know, I always feel good being able to incorporate those stories into it. Because when I watched it with her the first time, she got emotional. My cousin, she was like, oh my gosh, this is me, kind of. And I was like, it is. And a lot of those conversations were pulled from things that her and I would talk about. And the examples of like, I wish we could lay in bed together still and watch TV all day. Like, so a lot of us, you know, not just me, are putting in so much of our actual lived experiences into the show.
Which is great. I mean, you could tell right off the page that it's just like, oh my, every character is so unique. And within that, with those episodes coming from a Native female perspective, how important are those stories that it's told? For example, WideNet, like that whole character where you directed it, you wrote it, and you had an all Native female cast.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's so important to have those stories come from that perspective, especially the female perspective?
Oh, I think it's so important. I think that our women are such backbones of our community, and I think that they are also some of the funniest human beings alive. And I think that there's sort of like a space that was missing in the lexicon of Native women for what we actually are and how we behave and what we think and what we feel. And for me with WideNet, I really wanted us to have permission to be a little messy and to dance and to be sexual beings and to want romance and to be bummed out. I just wanted, the core of WideNet for me was giving Native women agency, in that they get to make the choices that they want and that they're really leading this journey and they're the ones who are choosing to go out and catch the fish. And I felt that it was very reflective of the kinds of environments that I'm in with my girlfriends. And I think that we have been sort of isolated to representation that has been, you know, a victim of horrific trauma, somebody's spirit guide they have in a dream, a super respected stoic woman, and it's not that we're not all of these things, but to me, like the gap that was missing in there was the multi-dimensional aspects that we are as women. And you know, I think there's a point in WideNet where Nathalie's character, you know, she's like, do you ever feel like we went from being kids to tradish overnight? And it kind of does feel like that in some ways. And that's kind of like what's reflected back to us in representation, you know? And so it's like, if that's what we're seeing we're supposed to be, if that's what we're told we're supposed to be. And then the reality is like, we know that we're not that. You know, some of my aunties and elders are some of the like funniest, raunchiest, humored women that I know. And I want us to be able to see that side of ourselves. And also for non-Native folks, that we are very living, breathing, feeling, life experiencing human beings. And so I think it's very important to see representation like this, because we have to diversify the ways in which our humanity is recognized in us as women.
Something that needs to keep continuing to carry forward in the future. For you, what opportunities do you hope for Native female creatives in the future, or for yourself?
I mean, I hope for Native female creatives that they have a spot at any position that they want in filmmaking or television making, you know, whether that is being a producer, a director, a writer, an actor, but beyond that, you know, it's like working in departments for costumes. Is it hair and makeup? Is it, you know, there's so many roles that tell this story that are so crucial. And my hope for the future is that Native women are able to put their foot in whatever door that they want and whatever their skill set, you know, whatever skill set they are most passionate and excited about. And I think, you know, in terms of like the representation aspect of it, My hope is that we get to have shows that are not solely based in identity. Like that we could be the star of a romantic comedy Christmas movie that's a blockbuster in a movie theater, and she will be Native. Like we won't take that from her, but it won't be, the whole thing won't be built around that. Or that she could be lead in a horror film, or that she could be a lead in a TV show that's all about dating gone wrong. I really, and then on the other side too, I hope that we can have really beautiful films that are in drama, that we have these compelling stories that somebody wants to follow. Can we have a romance like The Notebook that's ours? Like, I just want us to honestly be in every storytelling space, because we do exist in every space in America. So in my opinion, there's kind of no story we shouldn't be a part of. And I would love to see us in those.
Oh, that's wonderful. I would look forward to that too, to see that. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Tazbah. And we look forward to seeing what other great projects you're doing and seeing what's going to happen to Reservation Dogs for next season.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome, ladies. Before we begin the conversation, can each of you briefly introduce yourself and tell us where you're from?
Ani Vojo, Tamara Natishnaka Anishinaabe Kwe, Makwinidodem, Toronto Donjiba, Georgian Bay, and my name is Tamara Podemski, and I'm born and raised in Toronto. I am Anishinaabe from my mother's family is from Muscopeding First Nation in Saskatchewan.
Ani, my name is Sarah Podemski. I am related to Tamara Podemski. We are sisters. Also born and raised in Toronto, and my mother is also Anishinaabe from.
Coincidentally.
Naga, Nathalie, Standingcloud, Daudoa, Jalake, Yetley. Hello, everybody. I'm Nathalie Standingcloud. I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm Cherokee Creek and Salish.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jana Schmieding. I am Minneconjou and Sicangu Lakota enrolled Cheyenne River Lakota Sioux tribe. And I'm very happy to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you guys for being here and participating in this. You don't often see a lot of humor coming from Native women on screen. What do you think or the differences or the similarities when you are either writing or acting from a female perspective when it comes to humor, especially Native humor?
Well, I guess I'll answer both from a writer's perspective and an actor's perspective, because I'm a comedy person first, and was a writer and an actor on Rutherford Falls, which is also a Native comedy. And I really don't think that there's any necessarily gendered difference between, how we portray Native women and or men. I just think that there has been a gap in access and opportunity to comedy. For some reason, I think for many reasons, the industry sort of romanticizes Native women and, sexualizes us and, considers us tragic figures who are meant to die in the first act of any programming. We are sort of the prop to white protagonists' journeys in popular media. And so when we are writing for each other, we're giving each other, we're offering equity, we're giving each other opportunities to shine and to do what we've been working toward our entire lives. And, in my case, I've been practicing comedy my entire adult life, and young adult life. And so I think we're allowed to be raunchy, we're allowed to be messy, we're allowed to be, silly and our full selves when we write and see each other. But we don't have, we just haven't had the opportunity. until literally 2021. That's my opinion.
The only thing I would add is that having a lived experience when you write, write these characters, and you know how funny we are and our community is. It's just a more authentic portrayal. It doesn't feel, it doesn't feel forced. We are familiar with the comedy and the humor in our communities. So it's not something we have to, reach for in terms of like when we write these characters and when we act these characters, because, we know our parents or our aunties or our cousins or our sisters or our brothers or whoever that is that has, a very specific sense of humor, especially humor in dark times and humor when there's sadness. So I think that lived experience and that familiarity for all of us is like very easy to access, because I think we've all experienced in ourselves and in our communities and with our families.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is there are just facts of what it is to have a female body and experience the hormones and the changes and the full kind of physiological experience. And like, unless some dude is reading a book and researching and doing a documentary about how a woman experiences all these different things, we just know it better. And that's what Sarah was saying, is that the lived experience. Like, there are parts in that episode in Reservation Dogs that someone who does not know that sisterhood, that womanhood, can't write if you don't know it. Even if you've watched your sister or your mom, with their friends, it's something very different that when you know what it's like feeling the feelings and those dynamics, it's just the most authentic way. And I think that's why it resonates so powerfully, because it just is, it's just the real stuff.
Yeah, I want to backpack off of what Sarah said. It's just, it's easy. We don't have to reach. It's so easy to tell your truth when, that's what you were used to being around growing up, and it's just, it almost felt illegal how easy and fun it was. Because I've played a lot of parts that were just not like modern Native women. It was always in the past. And it's so nice to finally like be here now.
You were talking about sisterhood, and the conversation that's been talked about a lot. The episode is Wide Net. It's like the first all female standalone episode with Native women. What was it like to have that all female with Tazbah writing, directing, you guys on screen, and basically shedding that kind of stereotype of what, the Native woman getting killed off in the first half of the episode? How was that as a Native woman, just kind of shedding all that stereotype?
I would say that for me personally, it was just, it's such a relief. I mean, I've been in this industry since I was 12 years old, and it's like I've had to do so much invisible labor of, telling someone what my room would look like or my house would look like, trying to convince people what I would dress like, trying to convince people that I wouldn't use that language. Like, it was a lot of labor, years and years and years of just trying to convince people what my experience was. So to be able to come into a script like this and have it directed by Tazbah and written by Tazbah, and just have the support of all the other writers and all the other producers, it's like a relief. You get to go to work and have fun. You get to like investigate, these like nuances that you're not, for me personally, like I wasn't stressed out thinking about, correcting the narrative, which is, I feel like 50% of my job on some other shows. So I think that just relief of being able to go and play, and then on top of that, just have the support of such great actors to work with, and Tazbah as a director, it felt for the first time like I got to experience what other actors get to experience when they go to work. Like they get to just, enjoy and take risks and, all that stuff without being kind of bogged down by the stress of, trying to argue my lived experience or my perspective.
Yeah, I found it quite liberating. When you can fully trust in your director and in the script and in your castmates, and it just opens up so much more space where you can discover all the other things that are there. And I think what Sarah is saying is very true. When you are an actor that has spent the majority of your career focusing on representation and misrepresentation, and you are kind of on duty all the time as that like culture police on set. There's just not that much bandwidth to be able to do all the other stuff. And on a few shows, when I compare like fun factor, it's usually when I don't have to do all that other work, there's more space for me to not only have fun. If it's a fun story, great, but it just means the exploration, the liberation of self and thought that can just go into creative flow is so much more. And that is a rare thing. And that was, I think, what was so transformational to feel like, to witness it, that it's possible, and look what can happen when we have the freedom and safety in a space to play.
So in the environment, like Tamara said, we didn't have to spend so much time explaining, so we had more time to enjoy. And I really enjoyed that. And the fact that it was just like so much women too, because I've been in other scenarios where I was the only woman just surrounded by dudes. And so it was so nice to have this episode that just really just have that female power. And it was just so fulfilling.
Yeah, I was going to say it was sort of a meta week and a half shooting that episode, because, we're doing scenes where we as a group of friends are having a really fun time and like living our best lives and on vacation together, essentially. And that's sort of what it felt like rehearsing and shooting the scene in production. It felt like, we got to choreograph a dance together. Like, I haven't done that since I was in like middle school. It was like genuine joy, like genuine. And also, Tazbah she knows us all to a degree, and the entire, writing staff and Sterling, production staff knows our skill and our talent and respects it enough to pull from it. So to know that like Tamara Podemski was like on Broadway, like to know that we are all like capable dancers and capable singers. Originally the episode was written that we were singing and dancing to, I think, Mariah Carey's Fantasy. And they had full faith and trust that we could hold it down. Now, I do think that Fantasy is a little too high out of my range. But yeah, to be able to trust us and actually use a lot of the things that going on other shows and being in other films, you're not going to see Native women being employed with our full range of skill. I never expected that somebody would say, hey, I want you to do a dance number on TV. Like that I didn't even cross my mind. But when you're working with your friends and people who understand your capacity and trust you, it's just a really, really valuable experience that I do not think, Native women who have come before us have ever had the opportunity to do. So hopefully this really busts down the door for Indigenous women who want to exercise their full capacity on screen.
Have you guys gotten feedback from that?
I know that when we were in it, and especially the dance number, like on that day, we knew something special was happening. And, but there was nothing that could prepare us for the response that was, and we had two waves, because we had, the wave in America when it came out, and then up in Canada, it came out a couple months later. And I have not had or seen a response that was across the board. It was not culturally specific. It was not gender specific. It was not any, it was everyone from every walk of life that was messaging that about what it was like to witness these four beautiful Native women owning their sexuality, like just being in their power, not being perfect, not being, righteous, like just being so real. I was, I guess, not surprised, because I knew that there was something special. I just didn't know it was going to have that much reach and that much impact. And I'm talking like countries across the oceans of people who you're not sure, can you relate to what this is? And it crossed so many, boundaries that I didn't realize it would have been that relatable to so many people.
Also, I feel like I've been having the experience this year of not necessarily like impressing the young people, but a lot of the people who have responded to this episode, and I think to our work on this season of Res Dogs, have been other adult Native women. We need as much energy as the young people need. Like, we need to see ourselves on TV. Like, we didn't grow up with this experience. And so to see mature Native women, like Tamara said, like embodying our sexuality and living in our bodies and having a good time and being joyful together as we are in life, like, it's really important. It's important that we are able to look to our right and to our left and see ourselves in joy.
I wonder, do you take your characters from somebody in your life or your own experience in order to put it out? Because they're all so different, so funny, but they all resemble somebody that we all know.
I definitely use my mom because, first of all, I don't have any kids, but my mom has 3 kids. So that's immediately who I thought of when I was told that I got the 3 kids. And technically, I'm still a niece. I'm not even an auntie yet. So, but I have all the aunties and I have all the cousins and all the women in my life who I was able to think of and represent. And it just was so special to be able to do that with this episode.
I think it's a real credit to the writing. I love when I don't got to pull anything from anywhere and I can just use what she created. And I know she didn't, the character of Teeny was brought in an episode earlier, but also, I feel the most fulfilled as a creator when I get to just build them up from the sand and they just kind of become their own person. When we're dancing in the club, I may have some, personal experience there, but no, I love what the creators did with Teeny, and I just kind of followed their lead with what was already on the paper.
Yeah, I would agree with that. With the writing, it's just there's such a clear. I just always found with Rita that there was such a clear identity for her, and I just really liked kind of stepping into her. And there's parts of me, and there's parts of my mom, there's parts of my sisters, like there's parts of all the women that I know. But it's also nice because when we're on, the nice thing about like being so close with the writers and having Sterling there and the producers is that you kind of, they'll like share stories about their aunties or their mothers. And we're like in constant conversation about, you know, the people that we know and who the characters are inspired by. So even if you hear like a little detail or something that kind of like influences the way you would have approached, you know, a sentence or a scene, it feels like all, for me at least, it feels like all of everybody's aunties and women were like around during this episode and even the episode earlier. I don't know, it just feels really like they're always surrounding this show. Whether, you know, for this, it was definitely, you know, the women, but everyone's kind of always talking about like their uncle or their brother or this. Cause so like the idea of like family and community is very, is just spoken about a lot. So there's a lot to kind of listen to and take from and make sure that we're including kind of like everybody's experience in terms of, you know, what we're trying to portray. Cause all of the writers and, you know, all of the creative team are infusing it with, you know, their own lived experience of the people that they know. So it's kind of cool. I hear that I feel like I'll hear some detail from, you know, one of the writers or one of the directors, and it influences how I do a scene. Cause it's just like some nuance that, you know, I didn't grow up on the res, that I don't know that experience. So it feels like a safe environment that like people are sharing, that you kind of, you know, do a lot of listening and, kind of incorporate that into our performance.
With the impacts of, you know, Reservation Dogs, it being an all Indigenous cast and crew, from your standpoint, how much of an effect has it been, not just for you, but for the Indigenous community itself?
I feel like people are really excited to be themselves, to be seen on TV and have our chair at the table. It's given them more reasons to love each other in their community and be proud of where they come from and who they are.
I had an experience the other day where like an older white, not even like, maybe, I don't want to age him in case he's going to watch this, but maybe, you know, an older white gentleman who came up to me at a restaurant and was a huge fan of the show. And, you know, I hear a lot of, you know, on, you know, native Instagram, there's a lot of talk about the show, but it's also interesting to see like non-Indigenous people that are watching it that really love it and really appreciate it, and kind of seeing that they appreciate being led into the community in a way that they haven't been before from our experience and our voice. And I think that's really interesting because I do hear a lot of that like appreciation from the non-Indigenous community, being like, whoa, you know, they're responding to the human experience of the show, the love, the humor, the family, you know, the grief, and to be able to, you know, resonate with such a wide audience and hear people that I wouldn't necessarily feel like would feel seen by us, feel seen is really wild. Cause, you know, we hope that we accomplish that within our community, and then to know that it's going even further than our community, and to hear women of all, you know, races and ages identify with this episode and like feel seen in ways they've never felt seen in any show is like just crazy to me. You know, this idea that we take something from our lived experience that's so specific that for so long broadcasters, networks, directors, writers told us that was not going to be interesting for audiences, to see something have such a far reach and prove that just our human experience is something that people can relate to, is, I think that's really powerful. I always feel it feels really good to know that, you know, the reach is so big despite what we were told for years and years and years about our content and why we wouldn't, you know, be able to be behind it. I think that's really special.
Absolutely. And the fact that you're sharing it with your sisters, you and Tamara, and, having that, your cousins on the screen, but like in real life, you guys are sisters, and maybe people aren't aware of that. I mean, how is that shared experience together?
It's similar. It was awesome, but it's similar to that other comment I made earlier. When you feel safe, the play that is possible is it's limitless, and that's what you get when you get to play with someone you have known for a very, very long time, and your rhythms, and how to read each other, and that just contributed to that. There's more of that safe feeling, which is, and I say this, like, we might know amongst ourselves what that means, but I think people, our audience, it's helpful to explain that the scenarios that you're usually in when you show up to work are with strangers, are with you're kind of walk in with your armor, and then with that armor, you're asked to be your most creative self. And I'd say 90% of the time, especially if you're a gigging actor who's just doing different shows and you're not on the same show all the time, I find that the craft of acting is how with the armor can you play, and so when I talk about what it's like on in the Res Dogs world, that's what you get. You get to take off the armor and you just get to play. And it was even more so when you get to do that with your sister. I mean, the only thing is we get stupid. We just get really stupid with each other. And sometimes that makes it onto camera. Sometimes it doesn't. And I think we were a little bit surprised.
Everybody.
But that was like, there was one thing that we didn't think would make it on camera that was just a stupid moment of Sarah doing her silly songs that she does, and then we all started singing the song, and that I was actually very surprised about, that made it onto screen, and we were all singing a song about farting and shitting your pants, and somehow really, I actually think it was long enough that she could register it as a song.
I'm going to.
And then she can make some serious coin from this fart song. Anyway, but that's what happens when you feel safe. That's the point of that.
For people that don't really understand, like, the auntie role, what is so important about having aunties in an Indigenous communities, like their roles, for people that don't know, that wouldn't understand?
I always talk about this, that I think traditionally in Indigenous sort of family hierarchies, the hierarchy is different than it is in like a European, like a Western setting. And when we look back at our ancestors, the village mentality was real and necessary in raising kids and participating in community. And a lot of the time, parents weren't at the top of the hierarchy. Grandparents are at the top of the hierarchy in terms of raising children, and parents and aunts and uncles exist at the same level, at the same degree of value. And I think that has sort of transcended time, and we see it now that a lot of times, as aunties in our communities, we are doing a lot. We are raising our siblings' children with them. I was raised by my aunt. I see her as one of my parents, and I think as an aunt myself, I see my role as really important in holding space for my nibblings, as we say. That I think a sort of fun and objective parenthood that parents have a hard time accessing for their children. To be able to be fun and to accept them and to hear their complaints and feel objective about it as opposed to bothered by it. I think it's really important that kids have extended family, adults, extended family that can offer that type of parenthood. I really needed it when I was growing up, and I think we value our aunts and uncles because they're so funny and goofy, and like they don't have to do the super, super hard stuff that parents have to do. So there's some freedom in the way that we are, able to be with the kids.
Yeah, it's like it's like the most honest representation of adulthood you can sometimes find in your aunties and uncles, and actually even in your grandparents, because they're relieved of that pressure to be perfect. And so in terms of modeling, this is where the young ones learn, also through the dynamics. And I think it also is just this real, it helps people to understand that for that community to work, it's not a bunch of strangers. It is kinship. So sometimes the aunties, they're not blood aunties. They don't have to be related. These are just, it's the way that we say that we are connected, and that sense of kinship is the way that we take care of each other. And so just for, if you were saying, how do we explain this to people who don't know? They're not all literal aunties. But it's what they represent. And even in many of our languages, I know even in Anishinaabe, when you're, the sisters of the mother, these are all just, these are moms. These are just extended moms. And that just keeps on going, so that there's always that maternal presence. But in many different forms.
What is your dream project? What would you hope for yourself? Like, God, this is what I would want. This is my dream project.
I would love a project where there is no toxicity and where there is just good, creative people who know how to communicate. I think this is a challenging industry to be in. We've seen it with the Me Too movement. We haven't even begun to scratch the surface of just some of the other toxic workplace behaviors that still happen in our industry. So I think for me, I hope that, and especially with, diversifying the kind of people who are involved in the industry, like in the community, and being able to see more people of color and more women of color and more women and, non-binary folks. And just, I really hope that we're in a time that filmmaking can be a healthy environment to exist in. So dream project is just seeing that new generation of filmmakers that are considerate, that are trauma informed, that are unafraid, to rock the boat and change some of the behaviors and structures that have been worked very much against us for a long time. I dream about that a lot. I'm just trying to manifest it by myself and with my own work and in my own community. But that's what I hope for everybody. That's the dream job, that we get to kind of, go to work and have joy and be challenged and not have to deal with a lot of that toxic stuff that, we find a lot, unfortunately, in this industry.
I think that this was a dream project. I am living the dream. I got to star in a Native comedy, a sitcom, and now I've done a character part in another Native comedy. This is the dream. The dream is now. But for sure, there's so many more projects. We should be dreaming them up, and we should be writing them, and we should be producing them and creating the community that we want to see. We have an opportunity, we have our foot in the door now. So it's a good time to dream.
Yeah, I would just piggyback on that and say it's less about a project than about a new reality that Reservation Dogs or Rutherford Falls doesn't have to stand alone, in this landscape of television. My dream is that so many of us as Indigenous actors can smash the ceiling of opportunity that is limited by our diversity, by our ethnicity. My dreams are just, they're so expansive and inclusive, and it's just so much more accessible to so many new people, because when you bring in the new generations and the new experiences and perspectives, it just, everything becomes richer, and it just gets really hard living in a box. And I feel like for 30 years, Indigenous act, that's 30 years that I've been around. We've been making the best of very tight quarters. So my dream is also, what's happening right now is just a lot of ceiling smashing, a lot of barrier breaking, a lot of wall crushing.
A personal dream for me, I'm a full-time artist, and I was born in the 90s, so I really grew up loving that early animation of films, Disney style, things like that, Robin Hood, Jungle Book, for example. But I wanted to see like our creation stories and our stories in that format. So a personal goal of mine is to hopefully make a native animation in that quality, and hopefully be in our language would be really cool. But yeah, and then this project, just being able to tell our truths by ourselves has been amazing. But I also would hope that our Indigenous actors can play parts that aren't Indigenous, that we can also play those parts as well.
It's really inspiring to hear you guys say all that. And, I hope all your dreams come true, right? Because what's happening now is absolutely incredible. And I hope it still continues. It should continue. And just being here with you guys, I really appreciate that you guys took your time to speak to us, to speak to the community. And we look forward to seeing what other things happen and projects that you guys do. So this concludes our discussion. And again, thank you all for your time to being here. And thank you again.
Jimmy Gwetch, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
We do. Thank you.